welcome to the Festival of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement, getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, and Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on us authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
Hello, I'm Bernard McAuley, Bernie McAuley. We're from living in Washington on the very end of the state of Washington, on the very end of the Puget Sound. And I am the author of two books. One is the one that's being worked on right now or advertised and just came out, is Beyond the Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge. It's Joni's story. And I guess it's a girl's power story. It's about a young lady who decides to follow in her father's footsteps. The first book I did, and I'm trying to stick with one family, is The Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge. That is about her father who returns from Vietnam as a prisoner of war. He picks up his life, but he returns back to the family ranch in Montana. He was an airline pilot when he was recalled to duty for Vietnam. And it just kind of takes him back to where he felt that he needed to be. Along the line, when he returned, he had two children that he was basically single when he came home. His wife had passed away just a few months before. In fact, she passed away at Christmas time. And he came home in March of 1972. And he fell apart just about. But he needed to pick it up. He had two children. He was a single father, and he needed to pick it up. And he did. Besides returning to the ranch in Montana, he was able to begin flying as a commercial airline pilot, but he was also able to begin flying again with the Navy Reserve at Whidbey Island. The story that I wrote, this last one, is of his daughter. Back in the 70s or 80s, I should say, 80s, 90s, when women were just starting to come of their own in the military. In fact, they were not even allowed into the combat zone in Desert Storm. Joni ended up flying a spy airplane, a P-3A, which is really the Lockheed 188, around the edge of the zone. The story is her and her roommate and how she was able to become a pilot with them instead of sitting at home in Whidbey Island and getting frustrated because she wasn't with the rest of her group because she's a woman. It tells her story from Annapolis to flight school, through flight school, meeting a young man in Texas that her whose parents knew her beforehand. And I think what kind of inspired me, I come from a kind of a background. Thank you. Who inspired you to write this book? I come from a background ranching in eastern Montana. Rodeo is another thing I came about. Uh, and it many stories. I've in my own wife, for instance, I encouraged her to go in, and she ended up becoming in the budget manager of St. Martin's University here in Lacey. I feel women should have had their chance earlier. I can remember in when earlier in my lifetime when I became uh, worked with Northwest Airlines in Great Falls, Montana. Frontier Airlines just had hired a pilot, a woman pilot, one of the first. And that was when the chief pilot used to say, she taught me how to fly. So he was now her chief pilot. She was his trainer to begin with. Returning from overseas, I picked up a flight down in Los Angeles, Western Airlines coming up to home to Seattle one time. And I kept hearing this person giving the weather and giving different ideas, different things, which a flight attendant doesn't give normally. I'm thinking, what's going on here? Western's got a new thing going. And when we landed in Portland, just for a stop, out of the cockpit comes probably one of the most beautiful ladies I've seen in a long time. Her father was a famous movie star, and here she's flying airplanes for Western Airlines. She ended up with Delta Airlines in the end. And it just, I feel women should have a chance. There are some pretty good women in this world, just like there are pretty good men. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. And she follows in her footsteps. I have some things that here that kind of I put together earlier, and it's a good story. It's a continuation of a story. It's a continuation of a family of father, daughter, and the next story which I'm writing, and it's on my computer right now, and I picked some things out of it, just kind of I give you a little hint of the family. Her father ends up marrying a gentleman, excuse me, marrying a lady by the name of Dee Dee. And yes, that's right. Thanks for the statement. Everyone does have a chance on different fields, and no matter what it is, airlines are just starting to have women pilots, women ticket agents. Besides, women was not only place they sat was in a telephone area with reservations, and it was about 83, I believe, or 86 when women were starting to come over to the main terminal and work. But her mother is kind of the same, or stepmother, I should say. I'm just, if I can bring a couple of things about it, I was trying to put it together this morning, and it kind of identifies a little bit. Her mother, as I said last Thursday, I believe, her and her mother, stepmother, really got to know each other after she graduated and received her wings of gold from flight school. Her stepmother pinned them on her. And they came back to Montana together. They drove back to Montana together to the ranch. It was fall of the year, and they were able to stop in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Cheyenne, Wyoming, hit some of the places that her stepmother knew from her rodeo background. And her mother's the same way. Larry is encouraging her stepmother to become a writer. she ends up, in the story, she ends up writing a very important article on PTSD for the newspapers chain. And this is one of the things towards the end of Joni's mother's life. Her mother's name was Eve. Eve came out to Montana. Eve and Dee Dee ended up beginning to write letters back and forth to each other because Dee Dee felt, or Dakota felt, that maybe Eve might want to know some more about Larry's life and what he was really like in the rodeo field, that he was pretty good. But I'm going to read this little part that this is when Eve sits down with Dakota. It's the summer prior to when Larry was released from prison in Vietnam. And she's talking to Dee Dee or Dakota. And Eve is telling her first date with Larry. When Larry arrived at my apartment to pick me up for dinner, he noticed a piano sitting in the living room. He asked if he could play it while waiting for me to get ready. Slowly, he sat down and started playing a slow, moving love song. I came out of my bedroom wide-eyed at his playing. I decided to sit down beside him and play the lower keys while he played the upper keys. That night, we ordered a Chinese dinner in and never left the apartment. When the clock struck midnight, he got up, gave me a peck on the cheek, and said goodnight. I knew that night he was the guy that I was going to marry. And that's, most of my books, all of my books, I like to try to put it into the first person category instead of he did this, I did, or she did this, she did that. I want to put myself into the book and give those people the same feeling that I feel. And this next book is going to be Dakota's story, and it's kind of this next piece that I'm going to just read to you, since I don't see any questions. If I do, blink me or something. The book is Dakota's story, and Dakota is the second wife of Larry Becker and a stepmother to Joni. And one of the problems that she comes to as the story continues is she is a half-breed, or half Blackfoot Indian, half German. Her mother is a full-blood Blackfoot Indian, and her father is a German. And this is Dakota's story. Kind of, it's Dakota and Larry. Dakota came out to spend some days with Larry as he was doing his reserve training. And for some reason, Larry decided to find a car left on base or whatever. It was one of the cars that belonged to someone. And he and Dakota goes out to the beach. And this starts as Dakota's story. He was a man that I looked down on when I was in high school and later in college. He now flies two complicated aircraft, so above my ability to understand. He has been a POW, was married to the love of his life, and to most Montana people, he is a hero. Little like a kid, he showed me small squirts of rising from the sandy beach. We see those squirts coming out of the ground. Or see those squirts coming out of the ground, he asked. I replied, yes, questioning his sighting and surprised a couple of Montanans digging for clams and finding oysters on a beach in Washington. Half an hour later, Larry and I had clams we could eat and oysters. We then searched the beach for wood for the fire. When the fire was going for full bore, it will be a sequel for the story. Yes, we are making a sequel. This is all one family, and it just continues on. each book will be a total of 4 books when we complete it. Let's go back. When the fire was going full bore, he reaches into the cooler for a bottle of wine and a couple of glasses. I'm thinking to myself, this guy comes prepared. Fried clams, oysters, a fine cabaret chabont, and a champagne sunset. After toasting each other, Larry smiled and remarked, now you can yell at me. What is this problem about being a half-breed? You should be proud of the fact. You should be proud of the fact that you are half Indian. And it's the whole book. This is going to be a total of 4 books when I get done. And that's what I intended purpose is going to be done. I'm not going to complete I might go back to my own heritage back in eastern Montana. I was raised on a 14,000 acre ranch. My grandfather was a storyteller, and I can remember after we opened up the holes on I'm sorry. I'm going to have to answer this. Then try to go whatever. I'm sorry, telephones ring all the time here, and I don't really insist on leaving it, but we go back to Montana, and I'm sitting there one evening. It was Christmas night, and I was sitting on top by the highest hill on the prairie, and you could see the farmers' lights all the way up and down the prairie in from Malta, Montana, up in Highway 2, down to the Missouri Breaks. And the farms are 6, 7, 8, 9 miles apart. We weren't, all the ranches out there were large. It's 20 below zero. We had just opened up the water hose for the cattle. And that evening, it was a couple of days after Christmas. And we're sitting there on the hill, pickup turned off, window open, listening to the pipe. The gate had gate pipe that had holes in it, little breeze blowing, kind of singing us a song. Gramp would just say, wow, and he'd tell you stories. Zach just asked me a question. It's, wow, do you also love riding horses? You better believe I like riding horses. I've been on horses ever since I can remember. When you race on a 14,000 acre ranch, you ride a lot of horses. And I just kept up with it, even moving after being out here in Washington. I have a son that's probably one of the top quarter horse trainers in the United States, and yet he flies for Alaska Airlines. So, and I have another son who could care less. A horse to him is transportation from point A to point B. I've been up and down the Pacific Crest Trail here in Washington. I've enjoyed every bit of it. It's probably where some of my stories telling comes from. I do a lot of talking by myself, but I remember one afternoon or early evening, sitting on the lakeside, Dewey Lake, off the Pacific Crest Trail, and watching the fish jump all over. You just want to throw a fly in there and see. And believe it or not, I've never been able to catch a fish in that lake as much as I've fished it. So I enjoy horses. I was raised, as I said, I've backed into the Glacier National Park. I've horsebacked into the Bob Marshall Wilderness in western Montana, where the first part of the story begins, on the Sawtooth Ridge, which is on the eastern slopes of the Rockies. And for you looking around, it's Augusta, Montana, and it's also the home of David Letterman, if you remember him on late night talk show hosts. He moved out there after quite a while of being in the famous spotlight, so to speak. And he built a home out there, and he lives on a quite large ranch. And he's kind of adopted to the Montana life. He has a beard, last time I saw him, his glasses and so forth. So we've been around horses most of our life, with the exception of probably working in the Orient later on, and before my wife and I got married. And I've always go back to the horses. One of the reasons we moved to Olympia is so I could have horses, and I loved every bit of it. I would never. It's a good time to think. Horses are good. I've talked to my horse probably more than my wife sometimes, so it's kind of funny. And we've settled a lot of our own personal arguments out in the barn, so to speak. Maybe look back on it. Yes, I did. We're in a retirement community now. Thanks, Keith. I appreciate it. I thank you for asking. Her name, I've had several horses. Her name was Dimps, Little Dimps. No, excuse me. I'm sorry. Last horse I had was Fancy. Fancy. She now belongs to a little girl that's probably about 10 years old. And she was a quarter horse, and pretty good horse. She had her own, how am I going to say it? She had her own ways of doing things. And if she didn't like what you were doing, she'd let you know right out, just like a regular mare would. And my very first horse that I belonged to was Spooky. He was my roping horse, and my grandfather gave him that name, and I can to this day remember riding across the prairie trying to rope a calf, and a jackrabbit would come out beneath a big old huge rock on the prairie, and Spooky would go one way and I'd go the other way. And each had to have their own differences. Fancy was another horse that I had, and we ended up one time we were moving Black Angus bulls from one pasture to another, and a bull turned on us and charged us, and she never forgot that. We were okay, and everything turned out fine, but she never forgot that. And anytime a bull or a black cow turned around and looked at us, she was gone. So I enjoyed horses. I was a little bit in the rodeo, and that's what Dee Dee is Dakota, and Larry. Larry went to school on a rodeo scholarship and was in OLTC at the time. Dakota was the stepmother, who eventually ended up marrying Larry as his second wife. She was in college on a rodeo scholarship also, and she went to the top of her barrel racing group as the national champion. She was in college rodeo. She was in high school rodeo. So was Larry. And they got to know each other pretty well through those 2 or 3 years of doing rodeo. Not really together, but they knew each other. One of the first times that Dee Dee Dakota saw Larry, which is Joni's father, was riding a horse, doing cutting cattle up at his grandfather's place. She said it was just like a dance watching him and that horse work together. And it's this rodeo. It's my some of these experiences are mine. I worked for an airline. I was on a ranch. I've traveled most of Asia, and it's just I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed every bit of my life. And then I retired from Northwest Airlines in 2005 and ended up with a great life as working for the Griffin School District here in Olympia, Washington. And one of my horseshoers, or farriers as we call them, he asked me one time, he said, what's the difference between working with adults and working with children? And when I retired from Northwest Airlines, I was administrative supervisor, had 5 departments underneath me. said, well, I says, you do reverse psychology. Adults love to be children. Children love to be adults. So it's an easy way of working things around. If you have any questions, I'd appreciate it, instead of me talking all the time. It's start small, and it's a lot of work. It really is a lot of work, and I've enjoyed it. Our little acreage here that we had was 5 acres. I called it the good old homestead, and we had took care of other horses for other people. It's hard work. I remember going 300 miles for good hay. Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate the question. Boy, do I appreciate the questions these days. It's a lot of work, and I loved it. I loved going out there and cleaning stalls. Even in Montana, 30 below zero, we were out there feeding calves before I went to school in the morning at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning before the sun ever came up. And it was a good life. It really was. And it was a book to read or in the evening. We didn't have any power until I was in the 6th grade, and we didn't have any telephone till probably when I was a freshman or sophomore in high school. So the biggest thing we had was the little radio down there. Chrissy, I think so. It probably is one of my best books. It's I knew that's one of the things about books. If you're becoming a writer, have people around you. If you look at the book a little bit, the author, the cover is a friend of mine. She's an artist who works with me at Griffin School District. Inside this time, I have an editor. I have dyslexia, if I haven't told you before, and I needed an editor. Believe it or not, I have a neighbor who was a child psychologist at the school who knew me, and he's doing the editing for me because he's done a lot of psychology papers. So I think it's worth reading. It's a love story in the end. It's she finally finds her love. She goes through a couple of boyfriends, as we all do, girlfriends probably in an earlier time. And Chrissy, I think you would enjoy it. I've had a few people say it. Sometimes it brings them to tears. I'm trying to think of one of my ex-classmates says, "I've never laughed and been in tears so much in my lifetime." And oh yes, we need a lot more women like you. Appreciate the time. Wow, I'm thinking of starting my own business, and thank you for inspiring me. Women can really do big things. Margarita, precious Margarita, yes, you are. And don't let being a woman be. I encourage you. I've seen some great women around. I've known. I can't think of her name right off, but she won the Iditarod a couple times up in Alaska. She since has passed away of cancer, unfortunately. I've met her a few times, and she encourages me too. My mother was a woman of her time. She was quite heavy into real estate when she passed away. I was really amazed. She'd buy these old houses and fix them up and rent them out. And she had quite a few properties. She was great. She was great. I really look up at her too. And some of the women I've worked with, walking into an aircraft and seeing a whole aircraft for women, 2 crew members, cockpit members, and 3 or 4 flight attendants on board the aircraft, and how happy they are. And it's a whole nother story. And the men are learning to share their time, share their whatever. It takes time, as I said, for all of us work together. And I wish the world was that way right now. I wish the country was like that, where all of us together can work together and encourage each other to be the best that we can. I get the feeling that towards the end of this, we're getting towards the end of this half hour that they gave me. I just want to thank you for being with me today. I appreciate the time and your uh, questions. Remember, if you're out there, it's on Amazon. Beyond the Shadow of the Sawtooth Ridge, Joni's story. I think you'll enjoy it. I put myself in her position. And of course, the other one, which is the very first one, was the Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge. I think you'll enjoy both of them. Her father was a piano player, besides being a pilot. Very, in fact, he asked his second wife one night to marry him, Dee Dee Dakota, and she didn't really know what he was saying until uh, uh, Larry's ex, I guess you call it, mother-in-law spoke up, and he says, "Honey, he asked you to marry him last night." So it's whole family together, and that's what I wanted to do. It's airline business, it's the rodeo business, it's writing, it's the Navy, it's all of them all put together. And I hope you really enjoy the time. Thank you for tuning me in today, so to speak. And I hope you all have a good day. And please, beyond the shadow of Sawtooth Ridge, Joni story. And Bernie McAuley books.com is another place you can probably read about the books. And there are some nice compliments on that web page of mine. I appreciate the time. Her father had PTSD, so it brings it all together. It's back in the 72s when he was released from prison, 73, I guess. 72, I guess, or 73. And it goes back to my time, so to speak. And then it just starts coming along to where Joni is in the Desert Storm and ends up going back again to Iraq. And she ends up meeting her truly beloved mysteriously. That's what's great about it. All of a sudden, Sky sits next to her on an aircraft back home, and he ends up being her true love. And it's really a good story. I hope you enjoy it and have a good day.